Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And recently, I was witness to the fifth Venus-Moon conjunction since her appearance as evening star. And this happened within a wonderful array of stars that are known. Astronomers, modern astronomers anyways, call them the winter hexagon, because since it's centered around the area of the summer solstice, it's most easily seen in the winter when the sun is opposite that point. Some native or First Nations peoples seem to have referred to it as sacred hoop. This idea of a sacred hoop was very important in native and indigenous wisdom. The idea was that life is a circle, and that the four directions represented four ways of being, essentially. And this is, of course, very roughly paraphrased. I'm no expert, and I'm certainly, well, even white people, if you go far back enough, are indigenous. But the idea is that Great Spirit dwells in the center, and that the medicine wheel or the sacred hoop is a way of finding balance and a way of navigating life. And it's a really interesting viewpoint. But as I was looking at this great asterism of the winter hexagon or the sacred hoop, I realized there's a teaching there. There's a really powerful teaching there, and in fact, the next conjunction of Venus and the Moon will be within this asterism. That's how big it is. I mean, it's huge. Right now, or the day I took the picture, which I'll show you in a minute, Venus and Mars were about 30 degrees apart. And if you hold your arm out, right, if you hold your arm out and make a fist, at arm's length, a fist covers about 10 degrees of the sky. So Venus and Mars were like 30 degrees apart, 3 fists, and they were still both within this sacred hoop. And so the thing is huge. In fact, the stars that make up this asterism are Aldebaran, which is at 10 degrees of Gemini right now, Regal, 17 degrees Gemini, Capella, 22 degrees Gemini, Sirius at 14 of Cancer, Castor and Pollux at 20, 23 of Cancer, and Procyon at 26 of Cancer. So that's, that's like what, 30, 46 degrees. It's like a really wide swath of sky. I'll go ahead and show you some diagrams and such. For those of you who are just listening on the audio, it might be worth it to tune in to the YouTube version of this deal, because there will be some pretty neat graphics that I'm going to be sharing. So let's start with this. So this is a sky map of the other night when Venus and Moon were conjunct. You're looking west, about half an hour after dark. So pretty late in the evening these days, since we're in daylight savings time. And you can see here, if we just start at the top at 12 o'clock, if you will, there are the famed Discorsi, Dioscuri, however you say that, the Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux. And right below them is Mars, right dead in the middle of the Gemini constellation. And if we proceed clockwise, we come to the constellation Auriga, the charioteer. The alpha star is Capella. And you'll notice we're just kind of drawing a line from Castor and Pollux over here to Capella, and then along the edge of Auriga down to Aldebaran of Taurus, and then along the edge of Orion's it's a cape he's holding out there, I think, or a shield. And down to the foot star Regal. Some people might call it Rigel. And then from there over to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, Canis Major, Alpha Canis Major, back up to Alpha Canis Minor, Procyon, and then back over to the Gemini twins. And it forms this six-sided figure. It's wider than it is, or longer than it is wide, I guess. So it's not a perfect six-sided hexagon, but that's what it is. It's a six-sided figure. And this region of the sky is just loaded with stars. It's incredible. I'll show you what it looked like in person. I took a photo, and this photo is slightly defocused, and that's on purpose because what I discovered through a series of accidents, or what I thought were mistakes, is that if you miss the focus by just a little bit and you get focus and then you back out of the focus just a little bit, it really accentuates the brighter stars, and it also shows the color of the stars very nicely. You can notice here that Mars is very red, and there is Bet Elguz, the beta star of the giant Betelgeuse. Most people would refer to it, that's a red star. Yeah. There's Aldebaran, another red star. You can really see the colors there. You can see here the Discoursi. There, one is lighter and one is yellowish, orangish. The other is blue, right? So you can begin to see some differentiation, and you can see relative to the horizon, you know, how it's situated. So it's one thing to kind of look at a map, and it's another. One thing you can do to approximate this defocus technique with the camera is kind of squint your eyes a little bit. At squinting a little bit, adjusting the aperture of your eye, how much light gets in, that helps to, it accentuates the broad outlines of something, whereas when your eyes are wide open, we're more like detail focused, you know? So yeah, there's this wonderful section of the sky that's really full of stars, and it happens to be, notice in the diagram, if I go back forward here, notice in the diagram that zero Cancer, you know, is right here. And it's kind of pretty close to the middle of this place. And so there's this hoop of stars around zero Cancer, which is the solstice point. And this is where the most recent Venus-Moon conjunction was just inside of the sacred hoop, along with Mars. And then the next Venus-Mars conjunction will be over here on the other side of the hoop. And by this time, the hoop will not be completely visible. Part of it will be, Aldebaran will be just about swallowed up by the sun, and Regal as well. Sirius will still be visible. So we're having for a while yet this asterism visible in the sky, and the Venus-Moon conjunctions happening here. And in fact, as I said before, Mars is still present in this part of the sky. And Mars, I'm going to go ahead and close some of this stuff out that we've already looked at. Mars has been in this part of the sky for quite a while. I'm pulling up a map of Mars's most recent retrograde loop, the late 22, early 23. Mars started out over here and entered the sacred hoop, made it almost to the solstice point there. And notice this diagonal line slicing through the solstice point. This is what all the hoopla, unintended, I know, sacred hoop hoopla. This is what all the 2012 hoopla was about, right? This galactic alignment that you heard about. The galactic equator is lined up with the solstices at this. Now, the focus of course, was the winter solstice point, but it is in fact true of both solstice points. that the galactic equator is. Now, if we zoom in really closely, you can see it's not precisely exact. It's beginning to move off. So the precise exact alignment was somewhere around 2012. But this is a very long term. I mean, this is a once in 6,000 year minimum cycle. So like a decade or so on either side is kind of a really small orb, actually. But yeah, so Mars zoomed in to the near the solstice point, zoomed back out, and then zoomed back across. And now we'll find them there in the middle of Gemini, right? So Mars kind of warmed up this area first before Venus and the Moon are going to make two alignments in there. So we have this masculine penetration of, and really it's interesting because normally we would associate the masculine with penetration, but Mars is holding space there too, which I tend to associate more holding space as more of a feminine, like just sitting, being, holding space, right? Mars was actually not just penetrating, but also holding space in this. So this is a somewhat feminine aware Mars. And in fact, it's almost like he's the John the Baptist to the feminine who's coming to make these two alignments in this region. And so I guess we're done with that. Yeah, we're done with that visual. And let me just stop for a minute. Yeah, so this region of the sky has been active for a while. Mars was there. We've just had one Venus-Mars conjunction, and we're going to have another, Venus-Moon conjunction and another Venus-Moon conjunction in a month. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about this region. What is this sacred hoop? What does it mean? What does the Cancer point mean? And in fact, as I said, oh, there is one more thing I wanted to show you. As I said, this galactic alignment with the solstices has been going on for quite a while. In fact, let me show you a diagram from 1988, which is quite a ways back. This is before I was an astrologer, and that's quite a while. I was on my spiritual path. In fact, I was right here in the New River Valley of Virginia, where I am now. I'm sort of come back to my spiritual home, if you will, last fall. But you can see here the galactic equator cutting across the winter solstice point, and there is Saturn and Uranus. The last Saturn-Uranus conjunction happened at 27 Gemini, which is right at the galactic center, which is here. The bow of Sagittarius and the sting of the Scorpion both point at galactic center. In fact, this region is surrounded by a kind of a hoop, in a way, of stars, but really just like four constellations: Scorpius, Ophiuchus, Aquila, the eagle, and Sagittarius, the archer. And I was thinking about this. I wrote in an article for Planet Waves way back when, I mean, probably like a dozen years or more. For the Planet Waves website, I was writing about this. And I was like, you know, these four constellations kind of represent four different attitudes or ways of experiencing death. The Scorpion is this idea, embodies the idea that death could come for you at any moment, especially when you get up into your 50s like me. I mean, and somebody said like that the fact that I was saying this was depressing to them. I don't mean it to be depressing at all. I mean it to be the opposite. Like every day is, to me, much more precious because hell, it might be my last, you know? And so carpe diem. So I don't mean it in a depressing way at all, but the truth is, no matter your age, death can come at any moment. And that's what the scorpion represents. It's this hidden thing that might just ping, reach out and sting you, and it's over, right? Now, Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, there's this figure wrestling, and this is like Asclepius, the ancient healer, who was put up into the sky. He was actually too good at his job, and and the Lord of the underworld, you know, Pluto, got pissed because he's like, hey, you're stealing souls from my kingdom, man. This is bullshit. You got to cool it with this stuff, man. He was like bringing people back from the dead. And Zeus said, yeah, you know, you kind of crossed the line there, Asclepius. I'm going to have to put you up in the sky and make you immortal. Kind of a weird story, but, you know, those Greek myths can tend towards the weird. At any rate, there's this serpent handler. And to me, Ophiuchus represents the ability to transmute the poison of the scorpion or the snake. In other words, like Paracelsus, the great alchemist, said, the poison is in the dose, right? Because, in fact, if you drink 2 gallons of water all at once, it could kill you because it'll dilute your blood and the electrolytes will thin out, and the electric circuits that keep your heart beating and stuff might fizzle, you see? So even water can be fatal in a large enough dose, whereas in a small enough dose, a seemingly fatal thing could be curative, you see? So this ability to measure out and transmute the death power of this concentrated venom, poison, whatever, this is the power of Ophiuchus. And by the way, this is why you shouldn't get your hopes up that they're going to get Trump this time. Every time it's like, they're going to get him this time. And I'm like, I don't know. The reason why? Trump was born with a blood moon on the star of Alpha Ophiuchus. Okay? He transmutes poison into power. He's incredibly adept at it. And that is no endorsement, by the way. It's just an observation. Didn't vote for the man. I'm going to vote for RFK at this point. I find him very refreshing and very. I think it's just incredible to hear somebody speak the friggin' truth for once. But we need not devolve into the pit of snakes that is politics. And speaking of serpent bearers, but yeah, it's another reason why Trump's so good at politics, you know. At any rate, moving on, Aquila then would represent, well, let's move down to the archer. The archer, in fact, one of the most malefic star clusters in the sky is this star cluster Phasis, which is the eye of the centaur. It's like being in the death stare of the, you know, he's got his bow drawn and you're in the crosshairs, you know, so the ability to focus and concentrate and deliver a death blow, you know, that's what the archer does. So there's this powerlessness over death. There's the power to transmute and maybe overcome death. And then there's the power to deliver death. And then Aquila is the transcendent power to see above and beyond death, to have faith in something greater beyond death, whatever that may be. And I don't think you need to know what it is to have faith in it myself. I mean, who the hell knows? One thing we're going to talk about here that's interesting is that this region, of course, is the 0 Capricorn solstice, and the Capricorn and Cancer axis was thought of by I think Plato talked about it, but certainly Neoplatonists like Porphyry talked about these as gates, sort of Janua Coeli, the gates of heaven. And this Capricorn gate was the gate of the gods. This is where you would go when you leave the earthly plane, right? Because if you think about it for a second, the sun is at its lowest declination here, and it has nowhere to go but up. So this is a gate of upward ascension. And in fact, if you think in terms of the Kabbalah, right, the spheres of the Kabbalah go in Chaldean order from Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Saturn is the highest of the spheres, furthest along. And so you're already that much closer to the gods when you're in the sphere of Saturn. And then there you go, you're back up where you came from, so to speak. Whereas the Cancer gate is the gate of men or humans. This is where you come in. So the Cancer is like the gate of birth. Capricorn is like the gate of death. And isn't it interesting that these 4 constellations, and I mean, I wasn't even thinking about the Janua Coeli concept at the time. I was just like, what do these 4 constellations have in common, you know? But it's very interesting that they kind of also have this idea in common with the Janua Coeli theme, this idea that this is where we exit stage left, so to speak.
Recording in progress.
So yeah, we've been in this very long-term process of galactic alignment with the solstices, in my view, since at least around the 80s. And so we'll be in it for a little while, and this activation of the gate of birth and the gate of death, or the gate of descent and ascent, however you want to think about it, you know, if you don't like that word, death. But yeah, that alone is like, okay, wow, like here's the galactic equator activating these incarnation and disincarnation points. Like, what the heck? Like, and there's more souls on the planet than ever, right? So that's, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know what the heck that means, but it's pretty profound to ponder, you know. And so really focusing in on these points and kind of pondering them, I think is worthwhile. And you know, one way you can do it is to, you know, get out there under the sky. And so I'm going to share that photo from the other night one more time, just to give you an idea of what you're looking for. This was the view from my back porch, actually. Yeah, so there you've got this kind of sort of, you know, it's almost like an ellipse, a little more than a hoop, but this 6-sided figure. And the Betelgeuse, Betelgeuse, the head of the giant is kind of pointing towards the center of the thing, and you've got Gemini on top and Orion on the bottom. Yeah, so that's what you're looking for. And just pondering this idea of this as a gate where souls come into this plane, and thinking about, like, and by the way, this is basically what I see the birth chart as being. The birth chart particularly, and it's also the reason why I use whole sign houses, because I'll tell you, and I know there was a lot of controversy around this, by the way, and I'm not taking sides in that controversy because I don't have time for that myself. But I will say this: when I saw my whole sign chart for the first time, I was like, yes, that's me. Because, you know, these intercepted houses and blah, 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 and the 2nd and the 8th, they're kind of accentuated in my, you know, with Placidus or Porphyry or what, or Coke or whatever. I was like, you know, there was a lot of jibber jabber about that. I was like, man, you guys, that's not me. I don't identify with that at all. But when I saw that loaded Aries in the 3rd house, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a kid who was jumping his bike like evil, trying to be evil Knievel, hitchhiking across the US and all this other crazy stuff. Yeah, that's me. And so there's that. And then, you know, the other thing is, you know, as I look at charts and people send me charts that are you know, erected using these other houses, I'll say, oh, look at that square. And I said, wait a second, that's a trine. But the way it gets distorted, you know, it's hard for me to read a chart that looks distorted like that. And so I thought about it and I thought, you know, I think the whole sign represents a holistic kind of perspective. And I think that when we come here from a place of a holistic perspective. The distortions happen once we're here. And I don't want to read for somebody from a place of a distortion unless I'm trying to help them navigate a particular distortion. So if we want to talk about, you know, having kids, sure, I can put in the fifth house cusp, particularly in like rectification events. Ask people what are the 10 most important events in their life. They're going to say when my kids were born, right? So that kind of thing. But, you know, this whole sign thing, back to what the chart is, to me, the chart is a map. It is a statement of the soul's purpose for why they came here. See? Why I'm here. This is why I'm here this time around. Boom, here it is. Now, it may not necessarily, I'm not saying you picked each part of that chart, because you might have showed up in line. You know, I can imagine. You know what's crazy about my chart? I got nothing but Aquarius in air, Aquarius rising, no air, planets in air, nothing. I'm thinking to myself, what in the world? You know, but I can imagine, like, you know, well, South Node in Libra, right? So that's also, I can imagine showing up at the sort of lunch counter, you know, okay, you know, it's a la carte and you're piling on the air stuff. You get to the checkout and they go, wait a second, honey, you don't have any more credits on that part of your card. You got to put that stuff back. You got to go in there and find some other stuff, man. You know, that's not, you know, come on, you can't play in one part of the schoolyard, you know, forever. That kind of thing, you know. I'm just imagining. I don't know how the hell it works. I mean, who could? You know what I'm saying? But it's funny. It's interesting to imagine. But at any rate, it's kind of like a statement of, now some of the stuff I think you do pick, and some of the stuff you earn. You know, I told somebody one time I thought that, you know, maybe Aries placements happened because you were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. You were willing to give your life to in service of another, you know, that the sacrificial lamb. Again, is that real? Hell if I know, but it's an interesting concept. I feel that there's some truth there in my heart, you know, but yeah, who knows? At any rate, this idea that the chart is a statement of purpose, a statement of intention by the soul, that's how I read it. So this gate where the souls come in, the fact that we're having a couple alignments there, it might be an opportunity to kind of, you know, because life is messy, life is crazy, there's stuff happening. Yeah, you get pulled this, that. Wait a second, where the hell am I? What the hell am I doing? Where am I going? Where did I come from? Like getting your bearings, particularly after that mess we went through the last few years, right? Wait a minute, what am I here for? Right? Which part of that am I working on right now, etc. You know, I think it could be a really good focusing opportunity. So yeah, I wanted to talk in particular about this gate a little bit more. And it's really interesting too, because the other thing that's interesting, we're coming up, you know, Uranus is in Taurus. And so, you know, there was a lot of hullabaloo about the US Pluto return. We're coming up on the third US Uranus return, which I think is a much bigger deal because Uranus and Gemini, that is the place where Uranus crosses the ecliptic plane, and that's where it was discovered, and that's where it was when our country was founded. You know, I say our because I'm an American, and that's just, you know, hey, I'm an American. I've been here my whole life. What can I say? Yeah, so yeah, let me show you that one for a second. I'll show you the the Uranus discovery. We'll close this out. Uranus was discovered literally right between the horns of the bull, El Nath, and in fact, Venus is moving towards El Nath right now, so you can see that star in the sky. And if you look down and to the left, maybe you'll see Alheka too. So it's much dimmer star. El Nath is very bright. But this, you know, I really thought about this for a while. You know, the discovery chart for Uranus is a trip, yo. I mean, when you first look at it, it's like, wait a second. Scorpio rising, Uranus in the 8th house. I mean, this seems like a discovery chart for Pluto. But when you think about it, I mean, uranium was used for the first atom bomb, right? Enriched uranium. Like, it's a massive death. You know, mass death is one of the significations of Scorpio. At that time of year, everything's freaking dying. And I thought about, you know, isn't that true about technology though? Like, it has a very clear, it's a sword that cuts both ways. Typically people get really excited about the bright side, you know. I remember when, you know, cell phones first came out, everybody was all excited. Look at all these things it can do. It's got more computing power than the thing that landed on the moon, man, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, okay. To me, they were kind of a pain in the ass. I mean, this thing's always buzzing and going off and creating noise. I had a flip phone for a while, and that I did not like that. I never have had a cell phone. And then eventually the arc kind of comes around. Oh, these damn phones, they're making me sad, and like all social media. And I was like, see, I told you. I knew there was there's something there, you know. And so that's the way it is with technology. And isn't it interesting? Like, they're the horns of the bull, like the horns of a dilemma, right? It's like the dark and the light. There's this very dualistic kind of deal with Uranus. And I mean, look at the glyph. It's got 1 point in one way and 1 point in the other way, you know. But what's really interesting to me is the verticality here with Auriga, the charioteer, Taurus the bull, and Orion the hunter, you know. And so kind of the low, middle, and high vibes of Uranus, if you will. I'm really of this gate of birth. So really, and if you think about it for a second, you know, Taurus represents just raw power, right? Because if you look like in the there's those cave paintings, there's a group of cave paintings, they're called the Tauroctony, right? That's like they're aurochs, right? They're in the caves, like all these cave paintings of the bulls. You know, we hunted the bulls for a long time for sustenance. And then eventually we learned, and you know, our cousins, or, you know, whatever close relatives, the Neanderthals, hunted them with spears at close range, you know. I mean, this is like raw, brutal life force. And if you've ever been really up close to a buffalo or something like that, I mean, it is just raw power, man, you know. And then we eventually learned to harness this power. The first technology we kind of forget was the plow. We learned to hook these animals up to a board, essentially, that would scrape the earth and create furrows to make planting more. We could plant more and wider, and really like begin to put large areas of the earth under tillage, right? And this allowed for surpluses of food, which allowed for growth, which allowed for more power, and so forth, right? You see, so this idea of Taurus as just the raw power. And then the constellation Orion is like that, the hunter, right? So at first we hunted the bulls, and the myth of Orion is really Orion is kind of a poster child for the toxic masculine. Orion was such a great hunter that he boasted, either I could kill anything alive or I could kill everything. And Gaia was like, oh, really? It's interesting that you say that, because I have a friend of mine I really want you to meet. And so she sends what? The Scorpion to chase Orion. And so there's this linkage in the mythology between these two solstice points. Orion and the Scorpion chase each other around the sky to this day. See? And if you think about it for a second, I mean, no matter what, yeah, we overdid it for sure in a lot of ways, but until the Industrial Revolution, the kind of carnage that we saw like in World War I and beyond that, the kind of disruptions that humans are able to make wasn't possible. Like this, like when we thought about apocalypse, we always thought that it would come from without, that God would end the world through a great flood or fire. It was never a consideration that humans might cause that, right? But now this idea that, my God, we might, and I personally don't think that is actually possible. I don't think we could kill this planet. I think we could kill ourselves off and a lot of other species, but I think the Earth would come back personally. And maybe even humans. I mean, one interesting thing about humans is that, we've been dwindled down to numbers of like hundreds, maybe 1,000 humans at one point in time on the planet. Like all of the 7 billion of us come from, hundreds, maybe 1,000 or two humans at one point in time. There was this bottleneck. So this myth of the hero or the heroine that faces these dire circumstances and against all odds survives, that is our story. That is the story of humanity, right? So don't count us out, especially when miracles can and do happen, I'm not counting this out ever. But it does seem to be possible that we could make this place damned inhospitable, if not impossible to live on. Like I said, I personally think something would survive and that the world would keep going, but that's just me. At any rate, this sort of reckless lust for killing and egoic, hubris is the word that the Greeks use, that Orion represents. This is kind of the low version, and this is kind of what the story with technology always is. We kind of overdo it, and we get carried away, and then we go, oh geez, this thing, wow, it really does have a dark side. And it's like, duh, like maybe you should have thought about that before you started getting gung-ho with this stuff, right? And that brings us to the charioteer, because the charioteer is a figure that we have in the tarot, and I think the tarot image is really a great image to meditate on. By the way, there was a comet here, Neowise. There's a comet here. When was that? It was like during the pandemic, wasn't it? I think 2021, 2020, one of those years. I have to look back. I can't remember right offhand, but there was a comet right here by these stars. So that's also interesting. I have to look back and see if anything pops up for me there. But this idea of the chariot being the higher vibe, because the chariot is about integration on several different levels. And I'm just going to pause here while I gather my thoughts and gather my materials to begin the next phase of this little teaching.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so what's really interesting is that here we have Auriga, that is kind of the northern constellation at the Cancer point. What's really interesting about this is that in the Golden Dawn system, the Chariot card is associated with what? With Cancer. Here is the Trump number 7 from the Crowley Thoth deck. And you can see the sign of Cancer down here. Here is the same card from the Hermetic Tarot. Both of these are variations on the Golden Dawns book T by McGregor Mathers. And you can see the Cancer symbol displayed here very prominently. And just to bring that into a bigger context, if we divide the 21 major arcana into 3 lines, like Rachel Pollack did in her tarot book, the Chariot represents, as number 7, the end of the first line. And this is a really valuable way of looking at the tarot, I think, because it's based, well, I don't know if it's based on, but it's similar to Plato's division of the soul into 3 parts, which we'll talk about a little bit. Plato had a chariot allegory, actually, in Phaedrus. He talks about the soul in the Republic and also the chariot allegory in Phaedrus, and we'll talk about those. But it's also similar to Hermeticism, where you have 3 parts of anything: the salt, sulfur, and mercury, the body, soul, and spirit, something. And this is wholeness, right? This is where wholeness comes from, integration. So when we understand the different parts of something and seek to integrate them, that is where wholeness comes from. And that is indeed is where life comes from, right? And the ability to generate life, to regenerate the life force, that is where it comes from, see? Because, you know, there's a great quote that I really like by one of my early muses, the transcendentalist, Henry David Thoreau. He says, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root." You know, and what he's talking about there is that figuring out the root cause of something and addressing that is the only true cure. Everything else is just chasing symptoms. We're just hacking at the leaves. We're hacking at the weeds. We're not doing any real serious healing, you see? And so this idea that understanding the 3 parts of something, and I mean, look at the chariot for a second. There's 3 parts to the chariot. There's the chariot itself. There are the horses or sphinxes or maybe bulls that pull the chariot, and there is the charioteer. You know, and we can think about that as the salt. The salt is the chariot. The chariot is just, you know, it's inert matter. It's a box with some wheels on it. It doesn't do anything unless and until it is animated by the will, or by the sulfur, the will power, which is represented by the animals that pull the chariot. Right. And then and in Plato's allegory, he says, well, there's a light horse and a dark horse. There's our part of our will that is, like, you know, true and you know, stays on course, and there's the dark instincts that pull us off course. And you know that it's hard not to, especially these days, I mean, looking on the carnage of, you know, one of the things about Freud is that, you know, people said that Freud was, you know, kind of simplistic and everything boiled down to sex, but that was only true early in Freud. When Freud saw the carnage of World War I, he said, you can't explain this with sex. There's got to be something else. And he came up with Thanatos, the death instinct, you know. So that's the dark horse, and the light horse would be, you know, the more positive urges that we think of as you know, keeping us on track, keeping us going. So Plato talked about the need to balance. So there's balance even within each of these 3 parts. But you see, for the chariot to do anything, to go anywhere, to generate life, there has to be alignment between the chariot. It has to be in working order, right? It has to be put together correctly, working order. The horses have to be pulling in the same direction, and the charioteer has to be able to guide the whole thing to a particular destination. This is an allegory for what this Cancer point is about, what it requires of us. It requires integration between the body, the will, and the consciousness, right? And so this is a wonderful, wonderful allegory. Now, if we go back to this idea that that there are 3 lines in the tarot, right? This goes back to, some people have compared this to Plato's idea of the tripartite soul. Now, Rachel Pollack was saying that the first line, and let me just pull up the whole thing here. So here's the Fool, who is like the wild card that moves through all of the other ones, if you will. It's a 0 card. It hasn't a number. It can move through. It's kind of like chutes and ladders. In my opinion, it can jump into any one of these roles, and it can come back to the beginning and so forth. But these 3 lines, Rachel Pollack says that they represent the outer world of society. The first line is like learning to deal with become a social being, right? So you have the magician who is like, hey, look at me, I've got a bag of tricks, I can, right? And then the high priestess says, well, what about the inner world, right? And so, and then the empress says, well, I don't even have to do any tricks, Mr. Magician. I can use the power of attraction to bring to me everything I need. And the emperor says, hey, I can rule over all of this with an iron fist, and the Hierophant talks about the laws that govern all of this stuff that the emperor rules. And the Lovers begins now. Those first 4 cards, you see singular figures. They're different facets of being. The Magician, Mercury, the High Priestess, Moon, the Empress, Venus. The Emperor is Aries. Hierophant is Taurus, because originally the mysteries were a fertility cult, an agricultural cult, right? So Taurus, even though he's the Hierophant, the high priest, it's an agrarian religion. So Taurus, see, when we get to Gemini, we're talking about the twins. We're talking about integration. So these first 5 are singular figures, like different aspects of social being. And then with Gemini, we begin to talk about integration. Hey, there's this masculine and this feminine, and they're only really whole when they're able to operate together. And once they're able to operate together, then they can begin to navigate life. You see, and that's where the Chariot comes. So you get the couple together, whether literally, as in like, for the longest time, that was kind of like, the big social goal is that you got married, and then you sort of gained entrance into society. And so the Chariot represents like your ability to then navigate the world. And in order to navigate the world, you have to be able to integrate. So here's just the first line there. You have to be able to integrate these 3 parts, the body, the will, and the consciousness. And this is where science falls utterly flat on its face. I've said this before, and I'll say it again and again and again. I would love to just say this to a scientist's face, it's kind of that like, Luke, I am your father moment. Like, hey, we're not pseudoscientific. We're not trying to be scientists, because you guys and gals have concentrated on but one facet of the Hermetic triptych for 400 years. yeah, you've done a lot of really cool stuff, but like only with Freud did you begin to look into the motivation, the underlying motivation, the unconscious motivations, right? The will, like what makes people want what they want. So for 100 years, we've started to look into and then it's been 100 years since the discovery of the the observer effect. The simple act of observing an experiment can have an effect on the outcome. That's consciousness. That's the third part of the Hermetic triptych. You see, but they haven't even acknowledged that that's what's going on, much less begun to integrate it. So, if I were giving a grade, I would say, yeah, sure, you got an A, probably an A+ on the salt. I don't know where we're at. Let's just say you give them a C on the soul, on the will. You're failing on the other one. So at best, you got a C. That doesn't cut the mustard in a graduate course. You need a B or an A to graduate. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, this need for integration is so profound in today's world, and it's so not there in this line. This line ends with integration. We are not there. The social world is completely unintegrated, it's splintered, it's fragmented on purpose, I would say. And yeah, it sounds a little bit like a conspiracy, but look, not all conspiracy theories are necessarily bunk. A lot of them are. But, is it, look, the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, stood here and told us, you guys need to look out. This military industrial complex is getting out of hand. Then, John Kennedy gets into office and finds out the CIA is lying to him. And he decides to go against them, and he gets whacked. His brother gets whacked. Is it any wonder that RFK Jr. is a little bit distrustful of all of that? Come on, man. And honestly, I don't know how in the world anybody could be otherwise. I mean, it just boggles my mind that, you hear all of this talk about, colonialism and and it's like, wait a minute. Okay, so the same cats that did all this colonialism and all this stuff that you want to talk about is so bad, you're going to turn around and tell me I should trust them about what to put in my body? Not a chance. Not a chance am I going to do that. No. I don't trust them to tell me what to put in my body. I don't think they should be in the business of telling people how to run their business. Businesses were doing great. Supply chains were working. I mean, think about it. All that stuff was just working without us even have to think about it. Now it's all broken. Why? Because the government thought they could tell people how to run their business and what to put in their body and blah, 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 blah. It's inconceivable to me that we accept that as some kind of valid sort of, thing. But I digress, and I don't want to harp on that too much. But the point is that we are very sorely in need of integration between these three things, because we live in a world that has been dominated by materialistic science for 400 years. You can't live in a world like that and not be skewed by it. Every choice you have is skewed by this materialistic focus. And so you have to be extra mindful of the need for integration in everything you do when the social world you live in is so extremely biased towards materialism. You see, it seems very obvious to me.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so let me get back on track here. So the chariot represents the end of the first line, which is about learning to successfully deal with the social environment, right? And then Rachel Pollack says the second line, and I'm going to bring this diagram back up. The second line is about the inner world. So you have the outer world, which is the social environment of the first line, and then and that teaches you to become integrated, or it did once upon a time, anyways. And once you're integrated, then you can learn to go within. And so, you know, we talked about Plato's conception of the soul. He talked about it as eros, thymos, logos, desire, will, and reason, located in the stomach, the chest, and the head. It's very hermetic. And so, but you know, this idea of the unconscious, that the second line is about going into the unconscious. Yes, but notice that the first card in the second line is strength. It's about will. It's about you know, I remember so clearly, you know, my father, when he was helping train me for athletics. He had this way of, and he knew that he had to get me pissed off for me to dig deeper and find another gear to find. And so he would, you know, he had a particular way of doing that. And when he would hit the button and I would respond, he would laugh, and it would piss me off because I couldn't control it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help it. And it's like that. It's like an automatic response. But you know, the strength card is kind of, there's a dualism there, because on the one hand you have the raw strength of the lion, the inner strength to overcome obstacles in life and to and like in athletics, but also notice that the goddess has the strength to tame the lion, to keep the lion in check, right? And so there's this integration there between the raw power necessary to overcome obstacles versus the power to keep that in check when it is not necessary. You see, the hermit has the will to be alone, to say, no, there's a lot of noise going on here. I'm going up into the mountains, I don't need to be listening to all of this stuff. I certainly know what that's like. And so this development of the will, this inner sort of inner strength, that is achieved in the second line. And then in the third line is the line of the transcendent relationship with the world of spirit and the archetypal realm. And notice that the first one you got to deal with there is the devil. Right? The devil's going to say, wait. And notice that it's an inverted pentagram inverted, and it's a subterranean environment, right? Notice how similar it is to the lovers in the first card, but it's inverted. So it's perverted. It's a perverted form of the lovers. It's like, hey, all there is materiality, right? Get you some of the good stuff. Well, you only got one life, get as much of the good stuff as you can. That's what we're sold constantly through advertising, buy the, salty snacks, buy this crap that's not good for you, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, constantly, in a materialistic culture, we're barraged with this idea. But notice that the figures in this card, the chains around their neck, they're not tied tightly. They could just, see you, dude. I'm checking out of here. I'm not buying into this deal anymore, right? And then we go from there to the tower. The tower is about the casting out of the devil, which, yes, I actually am a Christian, and so I do believe in that literally, but figuratively, the devil is materialism. because materialism says there is no God. There is only, this, random electrons bouncing around. I mean, to me, that's like nihilism. And it's only when we cast out the error of lack of integration that we arrive at the star. And the star is like that first bit of light, that transcendent light that comes in, and then which grows in the moon card. And notice that in the moon card there's this gate, and it looks the same as the gate that is at the high priestess. So the high priestess is like the entrance into the inner world, and the moon is exiting the inner world. So that all of this inner growth, it means nothing if you can't take that back out into the world and do something with it, right? So there we get the sun, right? The sun, and we end with the world, So isn't it interesting that the Capricorn, is the devil, and this I mean, materialism is killing us, man. This idea that there's these four ways to deal with death, or of the constellations around there. I read somewhere that originally that Capricorn was not the goat, that it was a crocodile, and that there's even 3 parts to the Capricorn archetype. There's like, I'm gonna turn this off for not right now. There's like the crocodile, the goat, and the unicorn. So, and you can do this with anything. It's wonderful. That's the beauty of the Tria Prima, 3 primes. You can break anything down into its low, middle, and higher octaves, if you will. So you have the crocodile, which is just like this devouring, beast. The goat is actually able to climb the mountain and see things from a higher perspective. The crocodile never leaves the pit of the river where it can't. The goat has the ability to climb the mountain and see a higher truth, right? So even in its materialistic nature, by climbing, it learns, hey, wow, maybe there's more to this than just acquiring, goods and stuff, right? And then eventually you get to the unicorn, which is like, hey, I can store my riches in heaven rather than on the material plane. I can dedicate my life to the transcendent rather than materialism, So yeah, I just thought it would be kind of fun to do a tour of these 2 points, in particular because this Cancer point is being activated by the Venus and the Moon crossing through this sacred hoop there, and this idea of integration of the hunter, the bull, and the charioteer, and the need, the real serious dire need of integration that I see in the world today. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily dedicate ourselves to curing that, but it has to happen here first. It has to happen within the individual first before any change can happen in the world. An unintegrated person can't make integration happen out in the world. They haven't experienced it themselves, and that's why the chariot is the end of the first line. Like that you can't get to the next level without that experience of integration, which we've all experienced. I mean, think about it. Chariot is basically like learning to drive a car. Think about it, like the light horse and the dark horse. Okay, am I going to be good? Am I going to follow the speed limit, obey all the signs? The dark horse is like, there's not even anything, it's a 4-way stop sign, but there's not even anything coming in. It's really only a 3-way stop sign. I'll just make a quick right, and it's a right turn anyways, and that's like, yeah, okay, that probably will work 99.9% of the time, but it's like, then you start, not observing the another rule, and next thing you know, you may be doing something a little dangerous, right? And which is one thing if it's just you, but if you know, if you're endangering other people, that's not so cool. And so this act of learning to drive is kind of an allegory of like learning to integrate and be, you know, the body, the will, and the consciousness, and become and to navigate the world. Yeah, it's a powerful, powerful metaphor. And so this is for the next couple months as the moon and Venus pass through this area. I thought that was really a good story to share with you and to ponder on. And I hope that y'all get something out of it, and maybe maybe it can help you with some things that have been going on in your life. You know, this idea of like getting to the root of something instead of hacking at the leaves. I mean, I find that to be like really, really, because life can be overwhelming. And if you're just hacking at leaves all the time, you're just, things are going to pile up. You've got to be able to get to the root in order to, and oftentimes the root is not the material, right? The root is like in the motivation, you know, if you've got writer's block, you know, yeah, sometimes just showing up and just sometimes, you know, you can prime the pump by just like showing up and just writing, like you can just write anything and and next thing you know, you can prime the pump. But sometimes there's just, you know, an emotional imbalance that you're not emotionally ready to be creative. You've got to deal with some problem in your life before you can be a writer, you know. So the problem is not in the material world, it's in the emotional world. Or, if you have a plan, for, and things take a different turn during the writing, and go, uh-oh, how does this fit into the original plan, right? So then you got to go back, and you got, as the charioteer, the problem may be, in the logos, in the consciousness part of it. Okay, I got to figure out how to adjust, with my reasoning faculties, how to adjust the original plan to make room for this new development, and so forth. And so this idea that we just take a pill or a jab or whatever for every problem in life, I mean, I think that's one of the main problems with modern society. It's like we just totally focused on material aspects, and we forget that the root of any particular situation is the spiritual is the source of the physical, right? And so without a doubt, almost always there's a spiritual source for any sort of thing, good or bad, in our lives. And I think that's really an important thing to remember as we reach this gate, because the idea of integrating all three, the spirit, the consciousness, the will, the inner world, and the ability to navigate society, right? The material world. All three of those have to be an integration for us to be whole and to be able to generate life. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to be sending out a newsletter pretty soon, so make sure if you go to my website, put your name in there, your email address, sign up. I'm going to be giving away NFTs, magical NFTs. I've been practicing with the Midjourney artificial intelligence dealio, and it's generated some really intense images for me. And I'm using the magical elections that I come up with every month, and some that aren't even in the report, to generate these magical NFTs that I then upload to the blockchain at the elected time. And then you can like keep them. So you have to have a crypto wallet, but those are not hard to get. And once you have one, if you send me your address, I'll be happy to send you one of my new creations. I did one for the Sun Jupiter Cazimi, and I've done some more complex ones recently. So be on the lookout for my newsletter and a free NFT giveaway. And you know, you can always consider joining us. There are 3 levels of membership that you can join with. You can get the basic report every month, which gives you 6 different kinds of magical opportunities. So anything from like, you know, when do I, you know, talk to my boss or write an email about, like, you know, well, we've got a Mercury election for that. When do I do something that you know, to try to get some material, you know, resources coming in? We've got wealth talismans for that. We've got, so there's a lot of opportunities there. If you want to get access to my archives, which is like 10 years worth of lectures, and I've been all over the world giving these lectures and giving talks and writing articles, and there's a whole slew of stuff in there that you can dive into. That's the next level. And then if you want a reduced rate to consult with me, and also early access with me, because honestly, sometimes my wait times are like getting ridiculous nowadays. And if you're a member, I'll squeeze you in within a week or 2 at the most. But sometimes when life, you know, this time of year, I've got like writing deadlines. I've got the biodynamic planting calendar that I'm working on. I mean, I can be a month or more out on my wait time. So if you join at the higher level, that gives you kind of a, you know, frontline access to readings and consults with me. So think about trying that out as well. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me, and many blessings of the sacred hoop and the gate of humans, the Cancer solstice. And, you know, maybe something is being brought into being birthed through this passage of the goddesses, through the sacred portal. You know, we might think of this hoop as kind of an allegory for an alchemical container. So it might be that something is being birthed that is brought into manifestation, but it might also be that something is being purified and made ready for the next level of its growth, so you could be moving from the first line to the second line, or from the second line to the third line, through this alchemical container that the sacred hoop represents. Powerful, powerful stuff. All right. Thanks again. See you next time.